Greetings and welcome back to staff meeting. Today we want to talk about the pastor and your pastoral ministry. You know, nothing binds the hearts of pastor and people together like weddings, funerals, baby dedications. You know, as a pastor for many years, I may have forgotten some of the weddings I performed, some of the funerals I conducted, just like perhaps you've done also, but I'll guarantee you one thing. Those folks that you married have never forgotten that you married them. And I'll tell you something else. Those folks where you stood at the grave of one of their loved ones have never forgotten that it was you who stood there and spoke those words of comfort and hope. There's nothing like weddings and funerals in pastoral ministry that bind the hearts of pastor and people together. In fact, they're like bookends of our own emotions. I'm sure you, like me, have been from one to another in rapid succession, perhaps on a Saturday afternoon, preaching a funeral of some particular friend or church member, and then going and standing by that grieving family at an open grave and speaking hope and comfort into their hearts, weeping when they weep and sorrowing when they sorrow, only to get in your car and make a beeline back to the church where folks are waiting there to celebrate a wedding and one of the happiest occasions in their life. And we move from one emotion to another. They're like bookends of our emotion. In fact, I think that might be why the first recorded miracle Jesus performed was at a wedding in Cana. And the last miracle he performed before the cross was at a funeral in Bethany. In that first miracle, he was at a wedding, and he became the life of the party as he entered in to that Canaan wedding experience. And then he wept in Bethany when Mary and Martha, the sisters of Lazarus, were weeping over the death of their brother. He weeps with us in our sorrows. He rejoices with us in our joys. And that's exactly like it is in the pastorate. In weddings and funerals, how it binds our hearts together with our people and really legitimizes our ministry and the message we preach on Sunday. Let's begin by looking for just a brief moment at the wedding. It's really inconceivable that any of us who are called into gospel ministry would seek to marry a couple without proper counsel. That's so vitally important. And you know, I would always counsel people in premarital situations. I talk about three things with them. Their love, their life relationships, and of course the Lord. First of all, their love. The Greeks were so expressive, as you well know. In fact, they had three words primarily that expressed love. Here in our English vernacular, we're so limited. We use the word love to express the fact that I love my dog, or I love hot dogs, or I love my wife, or I love the Lord. But the Greeks had three words that really expressed their love. Of course, one was agape, God's love, that sacrificial, selfless love, that love that always seeks the other's highest good, agape. And then there is that phileo love, that brotherly affection. Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, that liking kind of love. And then, of course, that other Greek word that doesn't appear in the New Testament, but certainly is there in classical Greek, eros, that noun from which we get our word erotic, that fleshly, physical attraction. You know, the truth of the matter, people going into marriage and weddings, they need to have all three. They need to have agape love, God's love. And that's why we should not be unequally yoked to one another, because how could we ever love our wives with the highest level of love unless we know Jesus Christ and that high level of love which He expended and gives to us? So God's love, agape love, is the cement that holds a marriage together. And that's why one Christian shouldn't marry an unbeliever, that they ought to not be unequally yoked together, because only then can they both know this God's love by having Christ in their heart. And then there's that brotherly affection love, that phileo, that love, that liking kind of love, your best friend kind of love. You like to be around them. That's vitally important in marriage. And then, of course, there's eros, that fleshly, physical attraction. That needs to be there also. In fact, as someone said, you ought to burn candles in your home that aren't necessarily for religious purposes. So you need all three of those kinds of love. You know, that's why so many people go to a wedding altar and 6 months later they're somewhere else, because they said, I love you, but it was only that physical attraction. And after a while that wore off and someone else at the office began to flirt with them or something, they went after that. So when you talk to those folks about love, it's based on all three, and mainly that agape love. Then their life relationships. You should counsel them about that. Who's going to keep the checkbook? Who's going to pay the bills? All the issues that are involved in life relations, it's better to get those settled before you get to the intersection and not wait. Everybody thinks it's so hunky-dory and they get married, then they get married and have all these issues before they ever get to the wedding altar. All these life relationship issues ought to be discussed. And then, of course, the Lord. The Lord. It's the family that really knows Christ and has Him as the center of their life that stays together. You know, truth of the matter is, there's so many great resources out now for premarital counseling. Many churches have great before you say I do classes. If you don't have those in your church, there are all kinds of materials you can find, workbooks to help take those folks through. So don't marry anyone without really proper counsel. And when it gets to the wedding ceremony itself, in fact, in the pastor's guide to leading and living, I've got a sample of the wedding that I performed for my own daughter, our oldest daughter, when she was married, when I was pastor of the First Baptist Church in Dallas. And if you want a good example, perhaps, of how to go through the wedding ceremony in a God-honoring, Christ-exalting way, then you can find that ceremony right here in the pastor's guide. As to the funeral, how important is the funeral in pastoral ministry? Your presence is more important than any words you might say. You know, when a member dies, there are several B attitudes that the pastor ought to take. The first one is this. I would say be prompt. Get there. Get there to the side of the bereaved family as quick as you can. There's something about being there. You don't have to stay long, but just your presence there is more important than any words you might say. So be prompt. Secondly, be personal. Be personal. This is no time for formality when you're with a bereaved family. Touch that family. Hold that family. Let you be Christ's hand extended to them and Christ's hug to them as you minister to them in a personal way. And then, of course, be prayerful. Always pray. I always left the family with a passage of Scripture also as I pray with them. In fact, many times I would point to what I consider one of the most comforting verses in all the Bible, Psalm 57:1. It says, "Be merciful unto me, O God, be merciful unto me. For my soul trusts in Thee. Yes, in the shadow of Thy wings will I make my refuge, till these calamities be overpast." You know, there are also in the pastor's guide some examples of funerals. Many of us are called to preach funerals of folks that we're not sure know Christ. Don't make the mistake of preaching someone into heaven while there are all those lost folks there that would say and find false comfort in knowing that. If you're dealing with somebody you're not sure is a Christian, I use a outline like this, simply that I talk about the fact that God is adequate to comfort us, and use the John 14 passage, the Psalm 23 passage. And then secondly, I might talk about how God is adequate for our loved ones in the Lord who go on before us. And here I might be talking in third person. But there I talk about the plan of salvation. And then finally, God is adequate for tomorrow. You say, what do we do? We've lost our friend. And Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as you know your labor's not in vain in the Lord. And you know, another thing I would do as a pastor, Christmas is a lonely time for a lot of people, the first Christmas without a loved one. I made sure that 2 weeks before Christmas, they got a letter from me with a little poem in it that I always used, I think is also expressed in this book. And in that letter, it just let them know I was thinking about them. The pastor was thinking about them, praying with them. You know, one of the verses in the Bible, Jonathan said when David had to leave the house of Saul, he said, you will be missed because your seat will be empty. And a lot of people will be around the Christmas tree that first Christmas, and that loved one will be missed because their seat will be empty. And how much better that pastor remembers them at that special time and reaches out to be Christ's hand extended. Pastoral ministry is what earns us the right to preach on Sunday. And it is what binds the hearts of pastor and people together. Be about the business of being Christ's hand extended.